We already started. Hi, I'm Reika, the self-proclaimed expert of Nexo Knights. Today I have a very special topic: how Nexo Knights handles media presence and the film industry. This series has its ups and downs for sure, and I do consider this topic one of the ups. But how can it be that this topic is layered enough to make a video about it? And why this topic? Especially since they could have spent much more time with the medieval theme. I would love it so much, but also we have here the modern technology part, which is easier to handle and easier to receive. I'm sure kids react in a much better way to jokes like,
"Do I even want to know what the smiling piles of chocolate pudding mean?"
Definitely not.
than, I don't know, questioning if this king actually has any power or Fancy Pants really runs this kingdom. But, of course, they can't talk about modern technology in a detailed way either. You know, like how the presence of social media affects the society, how the appeal of squire bots affected the living way of peasants and servants, is the working class emerges, if yes, how, and if not, who messed this up so badly? But no, cause this is for kids. And it's understandable and reasonable, even if I have so many thoughts about this topic. So, based on these, displaying media and the film industry is a great solution. It's modern enough, but also relevant, so every kid can understand what's happening and still. It has layers. I swear. I haven't seen such an intense campaign against Hollywood in kids' cartoon ever since the Tom and Jerry, the Fast and the Furry movie. Let's be honest, it took this to a whole another level.
From now on, Hollywood is going to stand for morality, wholesomeness, good, clean family entertainment.
What's gotten into him? We can't have that kind of attitude in Hollywood.
So here's the time to take a closer look on this area and how it shapes the world and the story. Because it actually does. For now, my goal is really not a 5-hour-long deep analysis, more like an account on Nexo Knights' small wins and appreciable small details. By default, the series don't have much to work with, and yet they managed to get the most out of them. 3 reporters, 1 director, a Hollywood, and 1 channel named Nighton News Network. Or KNN for short. Gosh, it took long enough to land for me. These few characters are perfectly fine, and their pure existence is so parodic, it's a critic in itself. But I will detail them later. For now, let's look at how this show integrates the media. A long story short, it gives exposition mostly. A long story not that short, it does it pretty well. The fact that this show doesn't work with such a wide cast attributes a lot to this achievement. That way, the flu plus characters doesn't bother anyone and don't steal that much of screen time. And they're also funny, and I can't believe that there's more humor in a single crumb of these plot points than there is in the show's main comic relief. They either mostly serve as a form of information source or just interact with the other characters, mostly Lance. If there's no better way to give exposition, that's another question, but I tend to say no. This is not an outstanding solution, and once Nexo Knights settled on this, it commits to it fully, not just throwing it at the viewer, but injects some complexity and criticism into it. The story helping and fun part are complementing each other here pretty well. The most obvious example for exposition serving is probably Season 1, Episode 1. Looking through its target audience and given tasks, I think its performance was relatively good, not counting the sensationalist opening scene, which had no job other than showing off the definitely not main character Clay, by which his name is the very first name we hear and we first saw his face too. Plus they give some mystery to Merlok, who functions as a Dumbledore copy. But this essay is not for such details. Let's look at what they did here with the media. The first half of this episode is led by Alice Squires and her Herbertson, whose names actually borrowed from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. And they just can't stop saying exposition. We get the time and the place. We are 100 years after a big war against monsters in the realm of Nighton. Next to the king and queen, we have a solid army containing exactly 5 knights. Freshly graduated, I might add. And I'm actually so grateful for hearing that they call them a small class. If they aren't eager to work with more knights, at least they admit that it's not a big crowd. Then we have 2 more names, Merlok and Jestro, a wizard and a jester, so we are still on the medieval line, great. And another name and the second knight, Macy Halbert. We get her drama exclusively from the reporters, which is a great detail for me, because if one thing is really affected by the online world, it's the life of public figures. A little bittery from the media actually need it to be. Authentic, I guess. Next to the gossip, we also hear one little thing, that she was the second best student of her class. Whoa, who could be the first then, you may wonder. This little detail sure doesn't highlight someone. And finally, here's every knight, full name, face, and a small introduction. Why I'm ready to say that this segment is not terrible, it's because it doesn't try to tell everything. Or at least it doesn't tell that much. So if we just see it as one episode, especially the first one, it leaves a lot of space for deepening the characters, giving them conflicts, etc. They managed to do it? That's another question. For Clay, we finally get to know that he was on the top of his class. Wow. Also, he's the country boy, in short, a peasant. But that doesn't really bother anyone. We can kinda put together what he must be like, but nothing specific. Just like with Lance, who has an amazing lance, I guess. Thanks for mentioning. Again, you can see what direction he'll probably go, but they don't tell you that he's a sad, lonely boy who doesn't even want to be here, but his parents forced it on him probably because of a generational trauma, so he defines himself by his looks and his money because his worldview doesn't contain any other value, and his egocentrical self and the desire to be admired hides someone who lacks the actual self-confidence. But here we can only say that his life seems to be enviable, and that's enough. And then we can see the characters who made a challenge for the writers which they couldn't really overcome. Aaron seeks adventure, and according to some sources, he has got mad skills. As you may know, the series couldn't really do anything with this in itself. But it was a bit more than what Axel's got. Big, bad, and hungry. His introduction is just as bland and forced as Axel himself, but it didn't have to stay that way necessarily. And at the end, Macy, whose character is being a girl who loves fighting. Lovely. Maybe you noticed, but Clay got the most detailed description. How strange. And then the rest of the episode is a Clay Moorington advertisement, basically. If they don't show him, they show his mentor or his best friend. The writers even show that they still can give us more details by the commenting of Herb, such as
Merlok the magician really helped Clay be all the knight he could be.
Yep, Merlok's friendship and advice sure paid off.
What a shame that the others haven't got that detail-rich backstory. But apart from showing in the viewer's face that Clay is the main attraction, the episode has got its job done pretty well. Some questions got answered, some not, but showing a whole new world to 6-year-olds, acceptable. And of course started to build up the dynamic between the two hosts, but we'll talk about that later. And another, and let's admit, more creative way of serving exposition was shown in Season 1, Episode 6. I won't deny that I think it's one of the best episodes, not just in the season, but in the whole series. Apart from being well built up and entertaining, this part did its other job very diligently. My guess is that the writer's goal was to not let a minute go by without taking a jab at Hollywood. This attitude is present throughout the entire series, but this episode presents another level for sure. But that's not the time to talk about that yet. For now, let's look at the exposition. The discussion revolved around the remake of the cult classic The Golden Castle film, and in connection with this, viewers were given some additional information about the world. First, they only mentioned the Golden Castle without any context, so it could seem like a cute little Easter egg and a nod towards the original inspiration of Nexo Knights. But, as many other times, the show isn't satisfied with this, just uses it as a base. First of all, this kinda makes the old castle sets part of its canon history, and the Battle of the Golden Castle seems like a mythical, legendary battle. The resident brainy smurf, Clay, tells us that
Merlok defeated Monstrox in the original movie like in real history. Who would you play?
That's right, this is the very first time we get to hear the name monstrox. Until that point, we only knew that there was a lot of monsters and merlok defeated them. So we got an enemy. And a national hero.
Oh no! Please don't tell me that you, the shallowest knight ever, is playing Ned Knightley, the greatest knight there ever was.
Who, according to the Knight's Code, sacrificed himself in the big battle. Or, also according to the Knight's Code, was in the latrine during the battle. I let you decide which one you believe. No matter which is the truth, a lot of people see him not just as a hero, but a role model too. Just look at Macy, for example.
The legend of the Golden Castle represents everything I believe in.
It's clear that this story means a lot for this realm and its citizens. You can also see that in how there are many who are skeptical with this remake. Some could say that this is a desecration of this historical event and its value, which was also represented by the original movie and the comics. Not even mentioning how this aged as fine wine since, for example, back in 2016 we only saw the beginning of the overwhelming line of Disney remakes. Though I have in mind an even more fitting parallel, the only missing piece is a state aid worth almost 7 billion forints, or roughly $22 million. Either way, I'm sure that in this case no one really cared about the legacy of the Golden Castle, just the money and the fame.
They even got Jürgen von Stroheim to direct. He loves the project and wanted a new vacation castle. Clear your schedule, bubbler!
These two examples are the ones I found worthy enough to highlight. But it's also worth to note that in many cases the media in Nexo Knights pushes the story forward mostly by telling something to the characters. For example, in Season 1 Episode 9, Season 2 Episode 4, 5, 9, Season 3 Episode 1 and 6, and...
I call it a flat screen. Look how thin!
Season 4 Episode 4. Not my favorite episode. I throw rocks at this episode pretty frequently, and I still will, cause Jesus Christ, there's not a single point of view that makes this episode work. For now, what is worth to mention is the fact that the exposition serving by the media is pretty logical regarding to the knights, since they almost always in front of some kind of screen. But this time they switched it up and told something to the villains by it, and gosh, that was as stupid as it could be. Cause the knights, the sworn protectors of the land, with deadly calm, broadcasted fake news on the most watched TV channel of the country, hoping that the villains would see it even though they don't have TVs, and the knights were just lucky that Jestro happened to be in the mood to throw a tantrum at just the right moment. So the chances of a positive outcome were extremely small, but in return, most of the realm believed that their only protectors had been defeated. Even less than that was enough to cause people to flee in panic before. So congrats, it hardly could be more forced. No wonder why Jürgen thinks it's the bottom of his career.
So, we will all have to live with this dark stain on our souls until we draw our final agonizing breaths.
But in general, it wasn't hard to put the media in the story. It was pretty practical. This is enough to say that it's not in the way, doesn't hurt anyone, and it's mostly funny. Mostly. Desecrating a corpse on live television is a pretty strong exception. In the rest of the time, let's take a closer look at the characters. The list is not long, 3 to 5, depending on how I count. But with this small number, each of them got quite enough time to shine. And through them, I can talk about everything else, since every aspect can be linked to the characters. Okay, there's one spectacular example. A scene which in itself explains why I think it's worth to make this video. Because don't anyone dare to tell me that Nexo Knights didn't target the film industry and doesn't make comments about it at every opportunity when Season 2 Episode 7 is there. The main theme of this episode in a nutshell. The flu. No more, no less. No TV, no reporter, no one. Then there's the usual battle at the end of the episode. The knights are losing, the monsters are about to kidnap the royal couple, and then...
Told you this would work! The knights are as weak as kittens! But not those, ninja kittens from that web series.
Oh, I know. They're tough. Maybe we can recruit them.
Nah, they got a cable show now.
Come on, really? Not every web series can be a cable show. It's becoming ridiculous.
I know, right?
Jestro and the Book of Monsters must discuss where the world is headed now that even web series can grow into cable TV shows. It's outrageous, and what the hell does this have to do with anything? It's a mystery. Has it aged interestingly? In fact, does it say a lot about the priorities of the series? Most definitely. Is it probably a ninjago reference? Yes, which makes it even more interesting.
The footage I have gotten is terrible! Worse than Cable! Worse than a student art film about clowns, which I did not direct!
Now let's look at the characters. Here's Herb Robertson, the otherwise conceited, somewhat malicious, but often rather helpless host. He is present in the beginning of almost every episode, which is in itself deserves a wow. Cause the media is such an integral part of the series, it's what gives the summaries. Especially since they even make a joke about it at some point.
Clay Moorington has been turned to stone by dark magic, and I have been instructed by the Nexo Knights not to tell anyone.
This effectively turns the summary into a relevant and reveals the source of Herb's information, which I think is a really good detail. And of course, it's really not hard to remember his character since he repeats his name all the time. Not just in the beginning of the episodes, but also kinda every time he speaks.
I'm Herb Herbertson, and I must say...
We know who you are, Herb!
He's a worthy rival for Lance in terms of ego. It's particularly amusing that even though this guy keeps repeating his names all day long, Aaron still won't deign to call him by his name.
Isn't that fake-haired dude in your chair?
I wonder what he's trying to compensate for with that thick, huge wig. But no matter how much screen time he gets, the series doesn't even try to show him as a good person. He's confident and self-centered, but only when he's talking from the studio or when he thinks no one can hear him. Otherwise, they're not afraid to portray him as a coward, and there's nothing surprising about them doing so. Then there's Ellie Squires, who plays the role of the screaming, attention-seeking, whiny female reporter who can't help but drool over the handsome knights, which seems so deliberately impossible to take seriously to me because of her robotic nature. I'd be curious to see what kind of tone this whole thing would take on if she were a human. And although it's a bit less conspicuous, she is not exactly overflowing with goodwill either. But with her, much more emphasis was placed on the fan-like nature, so we watch her fawn over Lance for 4 seasons, and by season 4 we can see that even for Lance this can't fit into the ego-boosting category. Which, I must say, both impressive and reassuring.
Thanks, Alice. I think you got all the makeup off my armor.
Makeup? What makeup?
Oh, you're so cute!
In some places, it even pushes my well-worn cringe meter off the charts. I can't believe they actually made her say meow! Then, when you put these two hosts side by side, they basically argue non-stop. Which, on the one hand, might seem like acting for the cameras, on the other hand, goes on just the same behind the scenes, and thirdly, good luck trying to figure out why. One thing is certain, most of the news coverage is a battle of egos. Who can make the bigger claim? Who gets them on spotlight? It's worth noting, however, that Herb clearly leads in the number of insults, with far more offensive remarks, regardless of context or occasion. Maybe it isn't quite as intense in the episode 1, but instead they make the weak-haired guy jealousy towards Lance crystal clear.
Oh, he's the shiniest knight I've ever seen!
I'm Herb Herbertson, and she's Alice Squires.
And once again, his body language made his opinion of those silly puns quite clear. Then, sometime around the 3rd season, the writers completely let go of the reins, and a barrage of insults began.
It must be a real treat to be traveling all over the kingdom now that Lance is the new host of the show.
Actually, Alice, the treat part is not having to sit in a room with you every day.
I'm not doing those nasty Herb Herbertson intros anymore! Not doing it! Way to quit on our show, and now the name is terrible! Herb and Morning? Terrible!
It's just in from the Night News Network. Armorville is under attack by Jestro and the Cloud of Monstrox.
And a bunch of flying rock monsters!
Ooh, how insightful, Alice, since we can all just watch it right there on the monitor.
I used to live for new ways to hate you, Herb. Now, who cares? I'm going home to sulk.
I don't even want to make a snarky comment about you, Alice. This day is getting better and better.
Come to think of it, this evolved over the course of about 2 seasons. While it was only hinted at the first season, there was one harsh remark in the second.
And the ever-intellectual Alice Squire.
There's lots of dust, noise, and general chasiness going on out here. Hold on, here comes Princess Macy.
And by the third season, they had fully committed to it. God forbid I should claim the series delves into such depths, but the concept is thought-provoking. Herb essentially watches from the front row as a robot successfully makes a name for itself in his profession. But sadly, I can't exactly call him a misogynistic or a robot hater. Mainly because he simply doesn't interact with any other woman but Alice, or robots defined as female. There still isn't an excess of female characters in this show. Though I have to admit, in Season 1, Episode 1, Herb slightly defended Macy against Alice. I don't know what they base these scripts on, and I can't even say for sure if there was any intention behind it, but the fact is that Alice was the one tasked with picking on Macy. Then, of course, Herb couldn't resist joining in on the princess bashing for long, but again, the most insensitive part fell to Alice.
Well, now, Alice, she did graduate second in her class.
Even so, Herb, I think the king would rather see her in a sparkly dress than in a suit of armor. I never doubted it for a second.
Except when you just did a minute ago. Uh-oh, I don't think Macy's getting a shield, Alice.
Oh, that's gotta sting, Herb.
Girls, super girls, I guess. And then there's Season 2, Episode 4, where they shamelessly rooted against the royal team, perfectly illustrating just how flexible society's thinking is when it comes to what's cool and popular. As far as quality is concerned, they are satisfied as long as something generates high viewership numbers.
Now, a chipmunk that's learned how to do online banking.
Their professional approach is also interesting because they prefer self-promotion far more than providing information. I see this as a conscious decision, but it's also logical in the context of the story. Like, Herbert's jerkness must have been a deliberate decision, because it would be impossible to write something like that by accident. Regardless of his relationship with Alice, he had some less likable remarks from the very beginning, even if they were mostly just meant to provide humor. But I would like to emphasize that just because the main purpose of something is to make people laugh doesn't invalidate the meaning of it. It's just as much a part of the dialogue, the characters, the story, and the world. In fact, if it weren't, it wouldn't really work as a joke. This perspective is important in relation to the whole topic, because aside from providing exposition, the media serves as the humorous side in its entirety, but that doesn't make it any less well-structured or uninteresting. On the contrary. So when Herb says,
And the biggest question on everyone's mind, when is my refrigerator coming back on?
On the one hand, this is the part where you laugh. On the other hand, all he really cares about whether his frozen pizza will defrost. And let's not forget how much he values his own audience.
That ought to keep those couch potatoes out there happy. I'll be in my trailer. And I need a massage. Up to it, people. What? We're still live?
Once again, he's really just building his own cult of personality here. Doesn't care a bit about the audience. Season 3 takes this to a whole new level when it pits him against one of the main characters, clearly positioning him as a bad guy. It turns out that during those pleasant, peaceful times, Herb was removed from his host's chair without a second thought to make way for Lance, which was a very obvious demotion. Then, the very moment Lance was fighting on live TV without a real victory, Herb instantly made a report about it, even though he wasn't even there in person, and sat back in his chair with a big smile. Lance must have realized that the unpredictable entertainment industry would replace him just as quickly as anyone else. But at least he got a donut and a mug. Well, kinda. And of course, his own reality show, which I'll talk about later. By the way, holy crap, Alice's fangirling next to Lance was at 200%, and I think that pair fried everyone's brains. Somewhere around that breathtaking theme song. By the way, this is off topic, but there's a shocking number of songs in Nexo Knights. 8, if I'm not mistaken. Which, by the way, I think is really a lot, especially since there's that opening theme, a pop song, the welcome song in the beginning, the 2 robots singing in the chili contest, and ending theme, which is genius, and for some reason, Axel had to sing too. Twice. It's interesting, I'd like to see what led to this. Returning to the night and morning, in reality the whole thing is just Lance Richmond stroking his own ego, spiced up with fake smiles and forced laughter. Once again, the show isn't built around the news, but around the host himself. And to serve some exposition, of course. I immediately forgive the horribly awkward laughing when Lance says,
"My teeth hurt from all this smiling,"
making it clear that this isn't the result of poor writing, but a laboratory engineered level of awkwardness. God, I wish they'd put this much energy into everything else. Then there's our director, Jürgen von Stroheim, who got his name and profession from some German. Well, he's not exactly modest either. He makes it clear very quickly that the actors and everyone else, and Block, are all beneath him in rank, merely tools, props, puppets.
"My talking props will not speak as they please."
The value comes from him. He is the genius, but unfortunately he can't make a movie all by himself. If he could, he would have fired his crew long ago. And he really loves to yell. It was worth putting a megaphone in his hand. The episode that introduced him, Season 1, Episode 6, didn't even try to portray him as a near saint. The very first thing we learn about him is that he's obsessed with the project and wants a new vacation home. Then he shows up and starts yelling things. The parodic, exaggerated nature is evident here as well, and I pray that he isn't a moth for the writers in certain situations.
"And I order you to get the female knight character back here. I need her to balance a cast."
So positive. This could also be a kind of caricature of this writerly attitude if there were a total of 6 female characters in the first season, 2 of whom are monsters, and 1 of whom has been disturbingly over-sexualized here, 1 of whom has to be a woman because she's a mother, and the remaining 3 are so easy to dismiss as merely balancing the cast. Oh well, he's the genius, though I don't know why would his brilliant mind approve of making urinating in armor a recurring joke in a historical epic. But that's just one of the pillars of the much discussed Lance Richmond cult, and of course, a reference to the Monty Python and the Holy Grail. And to me, it only reinforces the fact that he's not here for complex, deep films, but for the ones that sell well. Then he runs into Jestro and the book, where he makes it absolutely clear that he doesn't have a single kind word for anyone. And he doesn't even have to make a direct dig. It's enough that he starts leafing through the Book of Monsters and praises the costume designer.
Hey!
Props did a fair job for once. This throat is disgustingly mucousy, and your breath has a rank, eggy quality.
This praise is somewhat undermined by the statement that, at once. Then there's that scene with Jestro where he totally deserved what he got. Yeah, sure, that's why you got your job, to humiliate actors. That's another matter entirely, though he perfectly tapped into Jestro's trauma, so it serves as a powerful recurring motif to show just how deep-wound this is for him. So, Jürgen is a jerk, but he certainly profited greatly from this film. The unpredictable entertainment industry turned against Lance once again.
It is designed to destroy the world's wealth.
And my wealth, too.
I think you were well on your way to doing that with your movie career, Lance.
And how easily the constant forwarding and bragging turned into a parody. Lance probably got on everyone's nerves enough that no one would argue with this decision. And, by the way, how interesting. These days, more and more actors can be accused of simply playing themselves in every movie, rather than a role. Lance embodied this phenomenon quite well here, turning a historical action film into a self-insert fanfic. In this regard, I have to absolutely praise the Hungarian dub. They got even more out of this concept than the original. The main reason for this is a very simple little detail. The ninjago reference didn't become lovagjago, obviously, after the original Nightjago, but Lance-jago, because, well, it's Lance Richmond cult of personality. And at the end of the episode, of course, the manager rushes over to Macy, saying he definitely wants to make her a star, but Macy brushes him off. The guy seems to run after her, but no, because at that point he says, "How does that sound? Clay Jago 3!" Meaning he just kept going with that momentum towards the nearest knight, and I love that. It's simply brilliant. Not to mention the simple fact of why it's part 3. A wonderful addition to an already impressive list of film references is the fact that
they don't even make the first 2, just go right to number 3, because sequels are hot, hot, hot!
It's fascinating that every aspect this installment parodies has only gotten worse over time. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, because in this episode they really spared no one.
Why Hollywood thinks more explosions equals a better movie is a mystery to me.
I mean, when the book says how powerful and magical the script must be, Jestro simply replies,
"I'm sure the hack that wrote it would tell you exactly that."
And when you think that they couldn't be more specific, Clay comes and says,
It's like everyone in Hollywood is a big baby.
Honestly, one of Clay's most insightful lines of the season. Who in the writing staff did Hollywood hurt so badly? Not that I want to argue with him, but still, wow. They let Jürgen take a little break after that, just so he could return in the 3rd season, and now he must be the writer's mouthpiece. Seriously, it's unbelievable that after it's not hard to accuse Nexo Knights of being boring in some places, they went and wrote this right into the script! I can't say a word about the lack of awareness, that's a fact, but seriously, this is ridiculous. There's that scene where the knights are talking about such ordinary topics, monsters, Nexo powers, typical stuff. There's no exaggeration, no emphasis. It's really just a conversation, exactly like all the others, and the series is filled with these, and then Jürgen comes along and declares,
So much of what they do is so boring.
I swear, mind-blowing. And then he told it with saying,
Cannot one of these persons be outrageous and unpleasant?
We all agree that he just defined Lance's role in the series, right? And let's not forget, this guy basically invented the reality show in this world. He is right that there's a demand for it, though he didn't actually go so far as to ask for permission, knowing full well what the answer would be. But hey, this is feudalism. Why would anyone need privacy rights? I've always thought it was a really great detail that, of course, Lance starts by saying Clay definitely won't let cameras into the fortress, but then he lists everyone, and I swear I'm impressed that they've all gotten to the point where they realize this is totally not okay. Okay, actually only when Jürgen goes near the fridge, they had to add that. I should note that this whole storyline raises some issues. Namely, the fact that the leader of the Knights is dying at the same time was delicately avoided. Obviously, the focus here is on the cinematic aspect, but this is basically a plot hole anyway, because seriously, how the hell did this stay in secret? At the very least, this had to make it into the reality show somehow. I mean, judging by the context, this stuff never made it to air, but even so, it gets to the editor, to the focus group that comes up later, and to Jürgen, who I think tramples over anyone's basic rights if he smells a good idea. And what is a knight with a curse if not a good story? But moving on, there was a whole bunch of people in the museum, for example, and it seriously didn't occur to anyone to go, whoa, wait, suddenly one of the knights isn't moving at all, only his massive suit of armor. Didn't anyone wonder why? Not even the king? And the whole turn to stone thing was pretty spectacular. It basically pokes your eyes out. And even if nothing else stands out, it should still be suspicious that this great knight was completely useless in the museum, while the princess in her fancy dress did all the work. This whole secret thing is really weird to begin with. I mean, how could the writers have missed the opportunity for the entire realm to recognize Clay Moorington as the greatest knight ever who gave his life to save the queen? Who cares if that's a massive exaggeration? Look! Jürgen is already directing the epic movie about his life! Yeah, it's a bizarre plot hole, and I can't find a reason for its existence, but hey, this isn't a unique case. In any case, the cameras here never captured this on film. Like so many other things, because honestly, I don't think a whole lot of exciting stuff happened until Season 3, Episode 6, where finally Jürgen could see some drama. That's also where he started to realize that reality on its own can be a bit boring sometimes, so he began adding some spice to the events. It's another matter that with this move Jürgen threw the concept of a literal reality show out of the window. This was an expected turn of events, partly because what they're doing is a total bore, and partly, well, what can I say, I just can't bring myself to believe that nothing is scripted on a reality show. So it's no surprise that Jürgen quickly laid out the ratings over authenticity equation. Pedig a hitelesség, az fontos. This might seem like a perfect, well-constructed structure so far, but it had to be made completely questionable. Yes, let me have a reason to use the word pedophilia in connection with Nexo Knights. Sure, that's what was needed. It goes in the display case next to the desecration. I simply can't come up with any argument that would make this acceptable on any level. Maximum mitigates it. Here, Axelna figures out how to make Robin jealous, even though he's been explicitly uninterested in her up until now. Their relationship always felt forced to me. The basis of their chemistry isn't that their personalities match, but that there has to be a romance here, and obviously the best way to do that is with two 11-year-olds. This is just a personal opinion, but the way something is portrayed matters a lot, and it is possible to depict the love between two kids in a way that's totally acceptable. The quotation marks are important, because I think this is completely different from the case with older people in every way. It all comes down to the execution, which didn't quite work out here. Exlena, have you ever heard of consensus? This isn't romantic or childlike. It's uncomfortable, both to watch and to experience. So a romance that was already a bit shaky has expanded into a love triangle. And the third part is Lance. According to Tommy Andreasen on Twitter, he's a grown man, roughly 19 or 20 years old. I can't believe anyone thought this was a good idea. The only slightly redeeming feature of this whole mess is that Lance isn't enjoying it. He doesn't encourage this behavior. In fact, it's clearly uncomfortable for him too. On the one hand, I'm grateful, but on the other hand, am I really grateful just because, according to the creator's statement, a 20-year-old knight doesn't encourage romantic advances towards his partner's 11-year-old sister? Has the show really set the bar this low? Anyway, in the end, Lance ends this great relationship on the director's order. And not because Axelna is a minor, or because it's disgusting, or because, I don't know, it's bad for the age rating, but because the focus group didn't like the idea of the love triangle. That's it. Otherwise, it could stay, because it's exciting, dramatic, and boosts viewership. Questionable for a kids show, but not for Hollywood. And Lance, of course, is a little hurt that he has to make someone hate him, since he's only done that unconsciously up until now. And he doesn't enjoy it, I might add. From this perspective, I can't morally question him. And it's worth noting that Robin started getting jealous when Lance began pushing Axelna away. Why? I mean, there's that whole thing about him wanting to be a knight and all that, and here he was clearly bothered by how they were treating Axelna. So if they're going to do something this awful, they might as well do it properly, and Robin could stand up for the girl or something. It would be so much better. But no, he just glares. Lovely. And then Axelna confesses her true intentions at the end of the episode, and wow, we could conclude that making someone jealous doesn't work. Wait a minute, it did work. I'm really annoyed by this little lesson, if only because Robin's change of heart was pretty random too. Maybe if they hadn't portrayed his awkwardness with such over-the-top comedy from the very beginning, I'd feel differently. But as it is, I can only feel sorry for this guy because he clearly didn't want this at all. Right until the very end. When suddenly he did, that's just what the story needed. What it really needed though was that damn camera. I'm not saying this season benefited much from this reality show style suffering, but at least there was finally a story arc that spanned multiple episodes. It was definitely time to set out on this path, even if it's just baby steps. And of course, we can't pass up the chance for a Lance side plot. You can never have enough of those, so the effort is commendable. And even if the execution stumbles a bit, the conclusion was well executed. Because this completely incidental detail managed to influence, obviously positively, the outcome of the episodes. A reveal and a rescue. They pulled off both at once. The reason is good, the timing even better, because they really shouldn't have dragged this out any longer, since just one episode later they already setting up the final. In any case, this is where Jürgen reached the peak of his career. After that, there wasn't much left for him, because the packed season 4 didn't really have time for Hollywood, but he did make one more appearance, and he filmed a black mark on his record that he'll have to live with.
Is this how a brilliant artist's career ends?
But I've already talked about that one. Yeah, that's pretty much it. To be honest, I'd love to draw some wise conclusion or something, but it's hard. My goal was really just to highlight and collect these little details, because maybe just by watching the series, all of these doesn't necessarily stand out, or at least it doesn't come together into a bigger picture. I think we can all see that this series is willing to stand by some themes, carry them through, and build characters and stories bit by bit, all in the background, just because why not? So this damn series can be smart, it just chooses its priorities in an interesting way. But I think it's important to highlight its good points, and most of these are clearly good points in my eyes. There's no denying that you can criticize Nexo Knights because it's episodic and all, but without it, there probably would have been far fewer moments like the many wonderful ones I've collected so far. I know I mention it a lot, but I really love the humor in Nexo Knights because unless we're talking about its main comic relief, I think it's genuinely good. It's a shame I can't really say much more about it because it's hard to find a more subjective topic than this. What I see though is that in Nexo Knights there are things that made me laugh as a kid, things that make me laugh as an adult, things that make my siblings laugh, things that make my mom laugh, things that make my boyfriend laugh, and even things that make his dad laugh. Long live the Monty Python references. By the way, I haven't heard any complaints about this yet. If anyone wants to argue otherwise, go ahead, but I think Nexo Knights is funny, and I consider that a huge virtue. Not just for this, but for anything I consume. But especially for this, because the poor thing hasn't had much else. And of course, it's a kids show. And I have my pros and cons for Nexo Knights' not really popular episodic structure, but it's hard to deny that most of this stuff would have been much harder to include without it. And I do think that it would be a shame. Maybe it's just time to accept the fact that the problem is not the episodic structure, but execution. Because otherwise the world building and the side plots would look much differently. And maybe this is a part of Nexo Knights' identity that we shouldn't deny. Wow, what a sentimental conclusion. That's all for today, I guess, but don't you worry, I still have Nexo Knights video essays to come up, smaller and larger ones too, so maybe you should consider sticking around. Bye!
Úgy utálok amúgy elköszönni. A legerőltetettebb dolog a világon, és annyira nem jön természetesen, hogy ez egyszerűen elképesztő, de amúgy meg amikor nem csinálom, akkor meg bunkónak tűnik, de közben kreatívnek is kell lenni, nem akarom ismételni magam, készszenvedés volt a lezárást is megírni, és mindez azért, hogy a nézőközönség fele el se jusson oda, most komolyan mondd meg, minek szenvedek? Ez egyetlen mázli, hogy élvezem.